The Upanishads are a beautiful treatise that combine the highest wisdom with life and show us the path that leads us towards freedom, towards immortality, towards griefless states, towards states of inner felicity, towards delight. It unites philosophy and the methods, the quest, so beautifully intertwined in many of the writings, slokas, that very often one wonders because by method we think it is going to tell us how to sit, how to breathe, how to do this, how to do that. But very often its statements, some of the bold statements that it makes, are themselves a method. If we reflect upon them, it enlarges our vision, it takes us to heights that are sublimest of the sublime. Take, for example, the very first opening verse of the Isha Upanishad. Isha Vasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bhunjita magrida kasasiddhanam. It starts with this grand opening. And the grand opening is that the divine is everywhere. Everything is for the habitation of the divine. The smallest activity, the largest activity, the greatest, the drift of the galaxies, the motion of thoughts, the rise and fall of feelings, the various inner movements that take place within us and within this creation in different worlds, in all of them, they are meant for the divine to inhabit, and there is a divine presence concealed within it all. And from there comes a practice which it says in very simple way, very direct way, tena tyaktena bhunjita. By renouncing, thou enjoy the delight. So this renunciation, it doesn't say very clearly what we have to renounce, and people can draw their own meanings. But what you have to renounce, this idea that it is mine. It's implicit in the very first sloka that all is for the Lord, all belongs to the Lord, and the Lord inhabits all. This idea that this is me, this is mine, this is what we have to renounce. And when we renounce it, it's not a renunciation which is a despondent renunciation of a vairagi who has got sick and tired of the world and therefore is renouncing. It's the renunciation of the strong who is basically moving from a state of conditional joy, which is what we experience here. We experience happiness and sorrow, pain and joy, pleasure together. So instead of that conditional state, we arrive at an unconditional state of felicity and delight. So it's inbuilt within the practice. So basically, it shows us a way to lead life. And then from that it comes, do not try to take anybody else's position. Why would one like to? Because nobody really possesses anything. So this way the whole Upanishad proceeds, and it gives us a number of key ideas to meditate upon. One of the methods of the Upanishad is that when we meditate upon the idea itself has a power. We normally take idea to be just one of those thought forms which have crossed, and we love to play with ideas. We love to pick up a thought from here, pick up a thought from there, and create a kind of hodgepodge inside the brain. But the Upanishad rather would tell us that take one idea, let it become our life, as Sri Aurobindo puts in Savitri, a lonely thought becomes omnipotent. Now, with this idea, there are several ideas which contradict it, several thought forms. Discard them. Just pick up this one idea and live with this idea. This meditation of the Upanishad is a living meditation. It's a dynamic meditation. It's a meditation that takes place in life. Nowhere does it say that sit like this and therefore meditate upon the idea. It's a living meditation. One can do it while walking, eating, speaking, listening, in all the various activities of reading, writing, work, all things. So what is that idea we have to meditate upon? The Isha Upanishad tells us, and in several places, even when the Upanishad speaks about Om. So again it says you have to conceive it as an all-pervading reality. So first thing we have to understand is God is all-pervading. He is not just here and not there. He's not just, doesn't belong to one particular denomination or a religious group, but He's an all-pervading reality. So it says that meditate upon this idea that the Lord is in all beings, the self is in all, and all beings are in the self, and the self has become all. So essentially in all the Upanishads, before we come to specific practices, just an overview, all the Upanishads emphasize upon this nature of truth, nature of self, nature of God. So He's everywhere and in everything. He's immanent in creation and He's immanent within us. So any which way we go, if we go to the end point, we will discover God. Now, several places in the Upanishads, for instance, we'll see this in the Mundak Upanishad, we'll see this in Kena Upanishad. There is a kind of feeling that it speaks about a lower knowledge or a lower, a kind of ignorance, and there is a higher knowledge, which is the knowledge of God. And there is a tendency to feel that it's saying that discard it, cut it off, and discover the higher knowledge. Well, it's one way to look at it, but basically what the Upanishad is saying is that it's important first to discover God. God knowledge first. And why God knowledge first? Because He is everywhere and in everything. So when we discover God, when we know God, we know everything. So it is going from within outwards, discover the source, discover the origin, and then we will truly understand this creation and know how to deal with it in the right way. So the emphasis is on God knowledge, but not discarding world knowledge. In fact, if we look at the Isha Upanishad, this speaks about these two types of knowledge. And it says that through avidya you find one kind of knowledge, which is also necessary. And through vidya you discover another kind of knowledge, the knowledge of oneness. And avidya is about multiplicity. So if one has to play with tools, a surgeon has to operate. So he must enlarge the scope of his understanding further and further and further, till a point comes when by this very progressive enlargement and widening of the lower knowledge, he can touch into the higher. And this we see happening in modern science. It's happening in physics. It's happening in medicine. It happens in art. That when you go to the ultimate point of enlargement, you will enter into the vastness of God. Just to take an example, we have one of our wonderful painters from the ashram, and nowadays she doesn't paint. So today only we had a small little discussions. One of the painters who was also present, he said, I am ready to give her a paper, and if she must paint. I said, no, she has finished the painting and now she is one with the all beautiful. Art is the expression of the all beautiful, and it's an attempt to search the all beautiful. So it changes the very stance, the way we look at life. One way to look at it is that, well, oh my God, she is now unable to paint. The other way is that painting has done what it had to do and she is upgraded. She has discovered the all beautiful. And instantly one could see everything in her change. Of course, at a still greater level, Upanishad tries to integrate the two, because we cannot really be an artist unless we in some way know the all beautiful. The very purpose of art is to reveal what is hidden by the forms, to bring out that beauty which is hidden behind. Same thing applies to everything. The purpose of science is to see how God works in this creation. Purpose of science is not that, okay, I've discovered some processes, which is fine, that's all right. But how God works in this creation, and when we discover that, then everything becomes so, beautiful and complete. This is the path. Second is that we must, if you look at through the Upanishad, this is primarily the yoga of knowledge which is insisted upon. There is works, there is love, or rather adoration of the divine, but it's primarily a yoga of knowledge, and therefore we see the stress upon meditation. But this meditation is not an exclusive meditation. There is along with it an indispensable basis which the Upanishad repeatedly brings out in various ways, and that is purification. Unless the heart and the mind and thought and the will are not purified. This is a very beautiful example the Katha Upanishad says. It says the master, like fire in the tinders. So, it's often people ask, where is God? So, the tinders, you have those logs of wood. So one can say God is like the fire in the tinders. Do we see it? No, we don't see it. Can we see Him? Yes, we can see Him. We have to extract Him out. So that's how it says that we have to extract the master who is there in the tinders through the fire. So the more we purify, the more the fire of aspiration. There is a lot of emphasis on this fire of aspiration that burns within man, the fire of aspiration which is at the base of creation. In fact, the entire Kathopanishad speaks about the triple fire. And through the triple fire, man arriving at the highest. And what is this triple fire? It's at all the three levels. At the level of the mind, which is thought. At the level of the heart and vital, meaning thereby all the dynamic impulsions of emotions and will. And at the level of the body. All these three, the fire must burn and purify. And it's only when things are purified, refined, and constantly sublimated, then only we can arrive at the highest. We cannot afford to step into two boats at the same time. This Upanishad says, without any mincing of words, that you can either belong to the world completely or you can belong to God. Now, when we belong to God, we automatically, the world comes to us. In Kathopanishad story is very interesting. It speaks about choosing and choosing wisely. Nowadays, there is so much emphasis upon make your choices. So, how do we make choices? So, choices are not horizontal choices in Upanishad. Choices are vertical choices. So, we can choose between what is pleasant and we can choose between what is good. Shreyas and Preyas. Now, the interesting part of the Upanishad is, this particular Upanishad is, when Nachiketa chooses the Shreyas, that which is good, then he has discarded all that gifts that Yama is going to give, the outer wealth, the riches and success, and he chooses that which is good. But the moment he chooses it, now Nachiketa gives him this, the Yama gives him a necklace, a beaded necklace, which is nothing else but powers of nature. They come to a person. So the way is very different, that yes, of course, the world is not rejected or neglected, but why should we live in the world in a half existence? We should lead a full existence. So the fullness of existence comes when we discover the fullness of being. So the emphasis is on discovering a greater and greater self. The greater we discover our own selfhood, the better we have command over nature. So this is another aspect that the Upanishad brings out, that nobody who has not refrained from evil doing. Now, evil doing is very simply a selfishly motivated action, egoistically motivated action, an action which is driven by the impulse of desire. So repeatedly we find an emphasis on these things. At one place it literally says the sacrifice of the head. So as long as man lives by the ego, as long as he lives by desires, he can at best form certain concepts, he can play with words, but he must shun desires. And he must shun desires not just as a sannyasi who shuns it for the sake of shunning it. He shuns desire because then only he will be allowed admittance to a greater felicity and delight. So very often people start with this conception of God that, he is truth and he is barren and all that. Often we image him like that, seated in some austere peaks. But in the Upanishads, God is described as not just formless being, but his essence is delight. Both the Kena Upanishad and further some of the Upanishad, they describe him as rasa. He is the supreme delight of existence. So it is this shunning of desire is not to be done with this idea of barrenness. This is the Gita puts it very beautifully. It says yoga is not done by a despondent heart. It is done by somebody who is full of gladness. I remember once someone from the ashram who had very heavy Parkinson's disease, trembling all over, had come to Pune all the way for some function. He's in his 80s. So he had come to one of our study groups. So someone there asked him, "Sir, aren't we supposed to become serious when we practice yoga?" So he said, "What do you mean by that?" He said, that man was also looking very solemn and serious. So this yogi very beautifully remarked. He said, "Well, when we are going to the home of the all delightful, we are bound to experience delight." So he says, "But what if we do the yoga more seriously?" He says, "Then you will experience more delight." What a beautiful way it says that, because he is rasa. In fact, the Upanishad goes on to say that such a person, how does he help to the world? There is another common misconception that such a person who seeks God becomes useless to the world. It's just the reverse. The Kena Upanishad, as a grand culmination, says that such a one who has found this truth, one can impart it to others, but more importantly, he becomes a nectar of sweetness. And all the people in the world, they get drawn to such a person simply because he is experiencing and expressing and radiating this sweetness which is inside. It's something so beautiful. Sri Ramakrishna would say that, as honeybees come to a flower. So this is how he becomes an instrument and channel for God's work in the world. So there is a great, but first he must purify himself. There is a great emphasis on purification. There is a great emphasis on truth. And the truth of the Upanishad is not just speaking truth, which is important. Truth of feelings, which is also important. Truth of will. What is the true will within us? It's not truth like cut off from the world. Truth is acting at every layer. How often we act hypocritically, and in contravention to our own inner truth, at whatever level we find it. It doesn't matter. It has to be the seeking has to go further and further. But finally, it speaks of truth as the very bedrock of existence. So, not to stop at any half hearted formulas of truth, but to discover the deepest truth that upholds this entire existence. So, this is what the Upanishad repeatedly reminds us, that follow the path of truth, Satyamev Jayate, because eventually this truth will win. So, it asks us to have faith, asks us to endure through the journey. Then there are some very interesting remarks that the Upanishad gives about some kind of preparation. It makes it very clear that we cannot know this truth by just brain power. So we cannot know it by sitting in a university, by doing a degree. We may do all the degrees possible in God. There are theological studies in which people have studied religious scriptures. But that does not give us God knowledge. It can at best be a preparation. It can widen the mind if pursued rightly. It can make the mind more supple. But eventually God knowledge comes by direct experience. Pratyaksham. That's what it says. And very beautifully it says, Nayamatma Namedhana Bahuna Shruti. It's not by reading, not by hearing, but it comes when the self decides to disclose itself. So why it delays? So another verse along similar lines, Nayamatma Balhine. So it says this truth is not for the weak. If we are weak, it will blow away our mind, all our concepts, and it shatters, because truth is not a narrow dogmatic formula. One of the first things that if truth manifests, it may well do is that take away all our religious ideas and throw them out of the window, and reveal to us a much vaster, all-encompassing reality. That experience of the mother, because truth is infinite, where she gave this experience of infinite to one of the Japanese. She could just transmit this experience like that. And when she gave this experience to him, he started running away. He said, "What have you done to me? What have you done to me? Why? What happened? I can't feel love for my country the way I used to feel earlier." Because, the way I used to feel means there is a complete identification with the country. But now there is identification with something infinite. Country has its place, its role, but it becomes so much secondary. Its significance is because of the divine. No more because I am born into it. And same thing with when, Sri Aurobindo would give silence to someone and the person started wondering whether I have gone stupid. So the mind has to be quietened. The discursive intellect cannot find the divine. It has to learn to be quiet. Repeatedly speaks about tranquilizing the mind, tranquilizing the heart of emotions, impure emotions, tranquilizing the will of this constant turbulence of desires. And when we do that, there are two-step procedure to finding the self. First, the self begins to reflect in the mind itself, like the moon reflects in a still waters of lake. But that's not enough. We must find the self, not just see the reflection. You see that story of Srimad Bhagavad Puran, which is so interesting. When baby Krishna is asking Ma Yashoda, I want to eat the moon, slice of the moon. After all, Krishna, he cannot be satisfied with anything less. So mother says, how can I bring moon? This is an impossible demand. No, I will only eat moon, then only I will go. I want to play with the moon. That's how he says. So Mother Yashoda thinks of a trick. She makes a little vessel. In a vessel, she puts water, and then the moon's reflection comes. He says, now you play with it. So he says, don't cheat me, don't try to fool me. So this immortalized in one of the bhajans, which as a child I used to sing, Kanha mange khel khilona, Kanha mange chandra khilona, Madhu Yashoda Maiya se. He wants to play, but he can't play with ordinary toys, car and all these things. He wants the moon. Now what is the moon? So moon is the nectar, a symbol of delight, symbol of spiritual light, which gives us joy. But it can reflect itself within a still mind. But even that is not the fullness of yogic realization. One has to realize him above it. So the Upanishads speak about a tire of words through which we move. We find this in one of the dialogues, Bhrigu Valli, where Bhrigu and Varuni, they talk to each other, the son and father. What a beautiful conversation it is. Not like, Dad, how much money I can get from you. So, of course, Dad is also a realized being. So he asks his dad, tell me about truth. And he says, you meditate and find. So he meditates and says, Dad, Annam Brahmeti. This matter is reality. Dad doesn't say nonsense. He says, yes, yeah, meditate more and find. So he meditates more. See, what was the method? And he comes back and says, oh, I have discovered that man doesn't live only by food. It's the desire which impels him. So it is prana which makes all things move, and it's the impulsion in life. So that is Brahman. And he says, well, good, but seek further. So he says it is the mind, the thought, which is Brahman. And he says, seek still further. Then he goes to the causal idea, the Vijnana. So he says that is Brahman. He says, wonderful. Just take one more step. And at the end he says, Anandam Brahmeti. He is verily delight of existence. So when we look at it, it doesn't discard any of this. It gives us a hierarchy of worlds in several of the ways the Upanishad speaks about the hierarchy of the world. For instance, we live in a very, honestly, a very claustrophobic existence. Even this vast material universe, what's the big deal if this is all? And because human beings began to realize, just as an aside, that we are living in a claustrophobic world, you see this stifling feeling, this claustrophobia, all this increased markedly in the last few decades. And of course, psychiatrists give alprazolam and clonazepam and some kind of training, but that's a part. The real meaning is that sometimes we feel cramped up within our bodies. And because the supramental manifestation started working, you will see that in the 60s, people wanted experience of alternate worlds. So they went into the wrong channel. The Asura was waiting there. Okay, come, I'll give you the experience. And through LSDs, they got projected into all the vital worlds. Some of them did experience something nice, but for one Coleridge, there are many who became junkies and hippies. But nevertheless, there was a search for alternate worlds. This alternate worlds has a significance upon us because all the powers are impinging. There's a whole Upanishadic story which speaks about the Devasur Sangram. Then there's another which speaks about Devasur Sangram in a very different way. Not the Ken Upanishad. I think it's Aitreya Upanishad or one of those nice Vallis where I think it's the Aitreya Upanishad, where the Upanishad speaks about the gods and the demons. So what were they doing? It says it gives us a method, and along with that gives us the challenge. So it says that, may we hear the auspicious, may we see the auspicious, may we speak the auspicious. It's a practice. How do we see the auspicious? There are people who say world is full of all kinds of, ugliness. Yes, it is. Still may we see the auspicious. Behind all this, there is hidden a supreme good. There is the all beautiful. And we must try to find him. That's why the Upanishad sometimes uses an analogy. Extricate. He who by discernment extricates the righteous from all this mixture. Kathopanishad. Righteous. What is the righteous? It's not righteousness in terms of the moral virtues. But the one alone who is right, who is seated in the heart, that also Upanishad says, concentrate in the heart on Aditi or on Om. So all this it gives. So in that conversation, Upanishad says that see the auspicious. Now how do we see the auspicious? It's the effort to see the beautiful, the good behind everything. Then hear the auspicious. How do I force myself to hear the auspicious? Because all things are all mixed. So here we have to learn to tune ourselves to the voice of truth, the hearing, truth vision and truth hearing. So truth vision is about seeing the divine in everything, behind everything. Truth audition is receiving the divine inspiration. All these goddesses of the Vedas, Ila, Mahi, Saraswati, intuition, through which we can actually start receiving inspirations which reveal to us, these inspirations are revelatory, which reveal to us the nature of workings which are going on in this creation. And then speak the auspicious. So that's why we see some of these rishis, they are very strange people. Even when they cursed, it turned out to be a boon. Because, they were so training their speech to speak the truth and to speak the auspicious. So, but it says he spoke the truth and the demon pierced it. He pierced the ears, he pierced the eyes, evil. So what does it do? It deliberately diverts us to see the ugliness. So wherever you find people who are all the time, some people come and say, who have read about adverse forces and hostile forces, and start telling, oh, adverse forces and hostile forces, they have to be reminded. Adverse forces are there. Nobody can deny it. But we are supposed to see the divine everywhere. Adverse forces and hostile forces is a small section in Sri Aurobindo's writings. That we must know, certainly. But we must not give it so much importance that we start seeing adverse forces and hostile forces everywhere. And we must know what they do. They are the ones who fill doubt in the mind. They are the ones who throw clouds of depression, despair. And we have to pierce through them. And how we pierce through them? These doubts and all. The method is not discussing, debating, but the method is beautiful. Bhidyanti hridagranthi chidyanti sarvasansya. Tear the veil of the heart. See the truth for yourself. Experience it. Become one with it. Pratyaksham. And when that happens, then all doubts are gone. After all, we can have doubts till we have actually seen something. We are going and we don't know how it will be. We have heard an opinion, we have heard contrary opinions, we have heard God exists, we have heard God doesn't exist, we have heard He may or may not exist, we have heard that Harvard University study that 40% He exists, 40% He doesn't exist, 20% we don't know. We have heard all these things. How can we know God through all these means? Walk. How to walk? Take the staff of faith and the fire of aspiration and walk. How to walk? It gives us a beautiful method. Arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached. Uttishtata, jagrata, prapyavarani bodhita. That is the seeker. The seeker is not somebody who 5-10 minutes says, okay, fine, I'll study something from the Upanishads or the Gita and I'll remember it and I'll vomit it. That's not the seeker's being. The seeker is one who is, there is a line in Savitri, questing for God as a hound. Can you imagine? Hound questing for God, where are you? It is that which really brings the divine, that prepares the consciousness. See how Meera sings bhajan, Main to saavre ke rang raachi. She is forgetful of everything. Mere to girdhar gopal dusro na koi. Adoration, submission to the master, speaks about the master. The Upanishad says this knowledge has to be transmitted by a master to a disciple. Because it's the highest knowledge. Even the most ordinary ABCD we cannot learn without somebody to guide us. This is the highest knowledge. A master. Now, Upanishad doesn't qualify living master, dead master, realized master. It doesn't say that. Well, but just for the sake of information, Nachiketa's master is not only dead master, he is death. So here it's something very interesting. This idea that later on came living master, Sadguru and all this, that the true master. So it created a lot of confusion in the mind. Well, it's good to have a living master, but you can equally have a dead master. I mean, death itself can become a master. How does death become a master to Nachiketa? It's worth noting. And even before that, what is the spirit of Nachiketa? The sacrifice that he makes. He says that, what is the point of giving things which are useless, which have lost their, milk, those cattle? Why are you giving them? Give something beautiful to God. When we go for offering ourselves to the divine, why do we give it? Sri Aurobindo writes so beautifully, till now I have lived my life as a thief. Now Sri Aurobindo is writing it in a letter. Why? Because 2 anna I have given to God and 14 annas I have kept to myself. Well, sir, it's not true of you. But still, he has written that. That's his humility. So what is that offering? Offer to God the best. What is the best within us? Our intelligence. Turn it to the divine. To know the divine truths. To let knowledge flame up from within. What is best within us? The heart surging up. The emotions. Offer it to God. What is best within us? The will which can achieve things. Strives. Offer it to God. So when we do that offering, then even death can become a teacher. We see it's very interesting, the dialogue between Yam and Nachiketa. Leave aside the deeper aspect, the symbol, the mysticism, but there is something very beautiful to note there. How does death become the teacher to Nachiketa? Instantly, by the very fact death is the teacher. Nachiketa knows that all that I can gain on earth is transient. So, you see, this whole thing can be summarized in one single way. I mean, of course, like all summaries, over-summarizing it. So he says that, well, all things that are transient, I can give you. And Nachiketa says, but you will take away one day. Yes, I will. I don't want that. I want the knowledge of the immortality. Who better to ask? So, what is Nachiketa doing? He is striving to find that which survives the end of time. So, when he seeks that, that is revealed to him, and death says, I'm sorry, I also don't know because I have not seen that great being. But I know where he resides. Where he resides in the heart, because that's place I cannot touch. How he is tied with 101 strings, all the attachments through which we spread out in the world. Repeatedly we hear this, that draw from the senses. It gives that image which is immortalized both in the Upanishads and the Gita, that when the life is driven by the senses, then it's like we are sitting on a wild horse and he's carrying us anywhere. Where will he carry us? Imagine, we sit on the horse and tell the horse, take me wherever you wish to take. So this modern concept, Meri Marji, is not Meri Marji. My senses ki marji. So when we are driven by the senses, this life invariably goes to perdition. I'll do whatever my senses dictate me to do. I'll go to the best eateries. Why? Because I'm having extra salivation. I'll be running after outer charm. So I'll be invariably, it's all the time people are busy with Amazon shopping, and I don't know what all new shopping centers have come. So what's happening there? It's like basically I'm driven by the sense. Whatever I hear, I tend to take it as truth. Whatever I see, I'm running after that. I am seeing appearances, and based on that, I am deriving conclusions. Running by the senses means that. But then we have to learn to self-mastery is another thing which Upanishad insists. Self-mastery, self-conquest, Swarat, Samrat. So what is self-mastery? First, the mind should learn how to rein in the senses. Don't act on the first impulse. Step back. Learn to live within, if you have to give it as a method. Step back from the senses, from the weaving of form and name. So it is not discarding something, but taking a deeper look. And this deeper look begins to reveal truths which are otherwise hidden when we are driven just by appearances. Take still further back. Apply your discernment. So in everyday life, when we are taking a decision, when we are going to speak, let it not just be a reactionary habit. I see something and I blurt out. I hear something and I blurt out. Step back. Apply the discernment. Maybe in the babble of a child there is a truth. Maybe in somebody who is accusing you of something, still there may be a truth. Discover that truth. That's what is meant by that, Shurasya dhara nishita duratya kavyo vadanti. Sharp is the path as a razor's edge. What does the razor's edge mean? It's about vigilance. Who can walk on the razor's edge? One who is vigilant. So vigilance means that one is ready to pick up every little pearl of truth from wherever it comes. And he discards the husk. That's not necessary. Mother speaks of it as that ingot of gold hidden behind a whole, wheat shaft. So shafts and the stems, they all are discarded. Ultimately, you want to extract that hidden ingot of gold. There are several ways mystics have, revealed this truth to us. As I said, master in the tinders. Where is God? He is in the log of wood like fire. I can't see him, but you can see him if you light up the fire. So there is a process to do it. And the process is the contact of the lower with the higher. That's how the, Kathopanishad speaks about that by contact with the higher. And how to contact this higher? You can contact it through the master, guru. There is emphasis upon that. Or simply by meditating upon the self. When we are seeking the self is also drawing near to us. Because he's a being. He's not just the God of the Upanishad is not just a formless, impersonal reality. Of course, he is that as a bedrock. But he is always portrayed as a being, as a delight. He's not bare truth the way we understand truth. So, apply the discernment, and discernment it should be further upgraded, and there is greater than buddhi is the great self. There is a deeper psychic discernment. So discernment is at two levels. One is that intellectual discernment, which is upgrading the mind, how to choose, but there is still deeper discernment, the discernment of the self within, and that should decide. The psychic being should choose what we should and what we should not. So there is the mention of the psychic being in Upanishad, that who is the real leader of the body. At one of the Upanishad, I think it is I may be mistaken. Svetashvatar, where he speaks about mana prana sharira neta, manomaya prana sharira neta. So mind is the leader of life and the body. But it says that who is the true leader? The true leader is Angusht Mat Purusha, who is within. That is what we must find. So Nachiketa, you want to find immortality? Find him. You want to find immortality? Find Aditi, who is hidden in the heart, the Divine Mother. You want to find immortality? Light up the fire in the tinders. And this is the fire of aspiration. Then we discover the seat of immortality. In fact, it uses something very interesting. The highest seat of Vishnu. Shobhita speaks about these highest seats. So, one of course is this lower triple world where he has put his foot. It's very interesting. If you go to Goa, you will actually see one of the feet of Vishnu over one of the asuras. And Gayasur, that's how you can actually see the feet of Vishnu. I mean, in the sense that it is believed that it is the feet of Vishnu. The second is all these mid-worlds and his highest heaven. And the third is beyond. So there is always this conception of the beyond. It doesn't stop even at heaven. So there are these two worlds. One is the dark worlds, which we are speaking about, Asurya Nam Te Loka. So those who live in a state of constant despair, doubt, some places it will use the word perdition. And then it says it has to be found in the body. There is no post-mortem salvation. The Upanishad doesn't believe in that, you have subscribed to an ideology or a belief system, or you are baptized into a religion, and by that very fact, one day when you die, one day you will wake up from the grave and will be assigned a seat in hell or heaven. No, sir, it's our state of consciousness that decides it. If you have lived a life of sadness, gloom, not fulfilling what your soul was meant to do, then even if you are a Brahmin, you are a Ravana and you come to perdition. That's how Ravana's story is. But if you have lived to fulfill what your soul has come for, then there is the ascension, then there is felicity. So all these wonderful thoughts and many more we see in the Upanishads, which are all yogic methods of practices, which is primarily, the method is meditation and concentration in the heart center. It gives us, the whole of Upanishad is full of this syllable Om. And it says that Om is everywhere. It is in the material existence. It says very interestingly, it says, those who strive after Om, the Mundaka Upanishad, the first letter, they find this material existence. Those who meditate upon the second letter, they have the subtle existence. And those who meditate upon the third letter, so they go toward the higher existence. And then finally, those who meditate upon the totality. See, the same thing like we have in the Mandukya Upanishad. The four state, Chatuspad Brahman, all this is the divine. But if you dedicate yourself only to this material existence, which is the first syllable of Om, it starts there, then you are confined here. You don't have release. And it uses the word that those who go after only the first letter, it is like the Rig Veda. Then the second letter, the Yajurveda, and the third letter, Samved, and then you go beyond, because all the scriptures ultimately you have to transcend them. So within Upanishads itself, there is the seed of exceeding all words which are written or ever spoken. One must start from there. One starts from material existence, one goes to the subtler, one goes to the still higher existence, and eventually, which is, the physical, vital, mental. These are the three worlds repeatedly, and then one takes a leap into the ultimate beyond. So this is the, as I said, many things, but maybe quickly, some of the favorite. We know that Sri Aurobindo used to love these two verses from the Isha Upanishad. So we'll just read that. But he who sees everywhere the self in all existences, and all existence in the self, shrinks not thereafter from aught. So it is not teaching us running away from life. Jugupsa. It is not teaching us, I won't go here, I won't go there. It is teaching us to face life. But face life from the vantage point of the soul. Not face it just with ignorantly that I'll go anywhere and everywhere, but face life, but face it from that vantage point. And when you have found the self, there is no shrinking from anything, even a battlefield. So Sri Aurobindo's famous letter that, if I myself send people to do business and even enroll them in the war, So yoga can be done everywhere and in any vocation. It doesn't require us to leave our jobs and then do yoga. It requires a one pointed concentration on the eternal and not on the transient things. He in whom it is the self being that has become all existences that are becomings. For he has the perfect knowledge. How shall he be deluded? When shall he have grief who sees everywhere oneness? The perfect cure for grief. And Mother says this very beautifully in toward the later part and everywhere in prayers and meditation also. But one place she emphasizes. She says, there is nothing else but the divine. All is the divine. All is the divine. And then she says, all the rest is phantasmagoria. Then obviously people are confused now. Everything is divine. She says the divine of yesterday, but invoke the divine of tomorrow. In the manifestation, the divine is constant. This we don't find very explicitly in the Upanishad. There are some things which are missing. For instance, the manifestation of the divine. The value of works, it's there, but not developed the way we find it in the Gita or even in the Vedas. And then, of course, what is missing is the sweetest of all, love for the divine and the madness that we see in the Srimad Bhagavad, we see in the Gita, and subsequently. That is something which is missing. It's primarily a Jnana Ganga. It not Yamuna and Saraswati. So it is a Ganges, pure, holy Ganges. But Yamuna, the life in all its gati, Saraswati, that deep, mighty river, which is not just wisdom but love, which, is the origin of things. So, if you want to be freed from delusion, we have to learn to see oneness. But this oneness is not a blurring of distinction. Vidyancha, vidyancha, yastadvedo bhyamsa. Oneness is in the background and manifestation is in multiplicity, and we have to understand the law of multiplicity. This law of multiplicity is not taught in science books. There is a very sad situation in India where under the influence of a kind of liberal thought, people say it's all same. Everything is same. There is nothing more foolish than that. Everything is same in a sense. And these people are very nice speaking in tabletop discussions, coffee table. सब एक है, एक ही माया है, सब एक समान. ईश्वर अल्लाह तेरो नाम, सबको सम्मति दे भगवान. सब सेम है. Okay, fine. Next, when you see a cobra right next to you, take him and embrace him. Say it is the same. No, sir, how can you say that? Then don't speak such foolish things. It's actually, this is the delusion. This oneness as a concept, oneness as an experience is a very different truth. It is where you see that divine element in everything, even in that which is opposing, even in the sword that is striking. And then it doesn't mean you will say, okay, oh sword, strike me because you are divine. No, because you have to also fulfill the role of the divine assigned to you. You will also take out your sword if necessary and resist the slayer. But we'll do it with delight, not with anger and animosity, not with that. You see how beautifully when we see some of these itihasa stories, Mahabharata and Ramayana, one of the things which strikes, even in fight, how could they say such things? That come, let's meet in a holiday of fight. They're not saying you are such a bad person and I'm going to, finish you. Nothing like that. The fight itself is so much, you can breathe the air of divinity in that fight. Rama, when he is waiting, imagine he should be very angry that this Ravana has taken away my wife, tormented my brother, and all of us are in such a difficult spot because of this fellow. Let him come out and I'm going to shoot him with a pistol. He doesn't say that. Ravana comes and starts bragging. After he has finished all his bragging, then Rama says, Ravana, can we fight or you are only going to speak? Look at the beauty of this. This only one can do who knows oneness. That well, all said and done, mera hi bachcha hai. Okay, today my role is to fight with him. I'll fight. And fight to the hill, to the full. And yet in this fight, I will never lose the truth of oneness that he who fights within him is also the same Krishna. And he who fights within me is also the same Krishna. And my rival's downfall is my own disgrace. I look at my enemy and see Krishna's face. So you see these stories where Arjuna has to fight Shiva. All this is very interesting. Twice he has to fight Shiva. Once when he is not aware and the other time he is aware. And yet he must fight because he must fulfill his role. He has given a promise and he must fulfill, even when he knows that there is certain death. So it liberates us from all appearances. In death or in life, we see the one. So, well, and that's why it reminds us that actually death is only of the body. So when we remember it, life becomes so cool. To use a modern term, the breath of things, Vayuranil Amritam Achedam Bhasmantam Shariram. That immortal self is the breath of life and the will within man. This doesn't die with death. It goes from life to life and returns to finish its fulfilled task. In fact, life doesn't die, it cannot die. It can only change forms and appearances. And then, so beautifully, again the fire comes because purification, Shuddhi was very much insisted. And this purification has very little to do with outer purification. In Chula, I have seen, my granny doing the, lipapoti in the kitchen. It's fine, but anger was the same. What's the point? Do that. That Shuchita is important. But the real Shuddhi is inside us. And for that, what is the way? It's not moral science rules of conduct. It's not, we don't need a book to tell us. It's not Yama and Niyama to tell us what we should do and what we should not do. There is within us someone which can tell us. And that is the God Agni, the purifier, the divine will in man. And if we have the aspiration, this fire, this flame begins to come, join with the divine will. And then this Agni tells us the good path to the felicity and removes from us the pravrti, the attraction towards sin. Not just evil doing. The European mind gives a lot of emphasis on outer control. So outwardly you should be very decent. But inwardly, you can imagine in your mental world anything. That's a hypocritical living. The true living is where inwardly we are cleansed. So you see some of these Indian stories very difficult to understand from another standpoint. For example, how is Yagnavalk having 2 wives? Now this is not how we conceived morality. Morality was never considered like, this put in slot. Good, bad. So when we live life like that, as Sri Aurobindo says jokingly, life governed by a set of rules, by a rule book, then what do? You become a hypocrite because you are not leading according to your own deeper truth. You are going according to an outer social conduct, which is okay, fine. If one wants to do it, no. But inwardly you can think anything. You can be the most unchaste, polluted, filthy fellow in your mind. But outwardly you should look decent. So this is what it is saying, that remove from us the devious attraction of sin. And so beautifully in the Kena Upanishad of this knowledge, this deepest self-knowledge, austerity and self-conquest and works are the foundation. One cannot lead a life of indulgence and imagine that one day suddenly they'll appear somebody and say, I am God. More likely it'll be the devil wearing the mask of God. Austerity. This austerity is again, as the mother explains, it's potentiating tapas, the energies which are the intellect which is discursively spread out in all kinds of WhatsApp Gyan and newspaper and God knows what. It should be turned one pointed towards the eternal. That's austerity. Austerity of speech. Don't speak unnecessarily. Austerity of actions. Only those actions which help us in moving toward the great self. Austerity of everything, feelings. So everything should be, austerity is about potentiating, about concentrating an energy and turning it towards the goal of a quest. So everything comes under that. The Vedas are all its limbs. What are the Vedas? They extend from within that secret knowledge, and limbs are meant to grasp things which you cannot grasp. So what happens to such a person? Vedas like limbs. He has the full grasp of the world knowledge. All around it can go and reveal. Truth is its dwelling place. So we have, of course it speaks about rarefication of the mind, again in the Kena Upanishad story and several places, that the Upanishad assumes that self is involved within the mind, and one has to, by subtilizing the mind, taking it higher and higher, potentiating it, you can reach a point where you can find the doorway to the self. Uma Hembati. So some of these, I think most of them already I have spoken of, but still, if something is missing, I'll see. Shreyas and Preyas, we have spoken about it. Pleasant and the beautiful. Pleasant and the good, not beautiful. This wisdom is not to be had by reasoning, O beloved Nachiketas. Only when told thee by another it brings real knowledge. Not another anybody, but somebody who has the self knowledge can impart it. The wisdom which thou hast gotten, truly thou art steadfast in the truth. Why? Because he was after this seeking. What is that truth which holds this entire existence? Even such a questioner as thou art, may I meet with always. Poor death is looking for such a questioner when it can say, Sir, you are immortal. I give it back to you. But most are not seekers, so it takes them away. When mortal man has heard, when he has grasped, when he has forcefully separated the righteous one from his body and won that subtle being, it is locked with the body, it's to be separated. Very beautifully, one of Swami Vivekananda's famous quotes: read, think, meditate, and then let this idea flow into your veins. Let it occupy every possible space. And then this, by the power of this idea, this truth is extracted from everywhere. There is a call within. Then he has delight, for he has got that which one can indeed delight in. So, what is the sign that we are arriving at God knowledge? Not the ability to give lectures, not the ability to remember all the things. All these things will come, but they are not the real thing. That person verily lives in delight. There is no more sorrow, griefless state. There is always this state of inner delight. And then, of course, it speaks about this support is the best, this support is the highest. Knowing this support, one grows great in the world of the Brahman. Who is the support? Om, the syllable Om, the power of the word. The Upanishad speaks about this support is the greatest and the highest that man can ever have. And it's by grace that it reveals itself. None who has not ceased from doing evil, or who is not calm, or not concentrated in his being, or whose mind has not been tranquilized, can by wisdom attain to him. Mind has to become quiet, tranquility. There has to be calm, peace, equanimity. One should not be disturbed by up and down of circumstances. Even if one is disturbed momentarily, one has to get back to that poise. Learn to do that, then we can have it. May we have strength to kindle Agni, for he is the bridge of those who do sacrifice, and he is Brahman, supreme and imperishable, and the far shore of security to those who would cross this ocean. What is Agni? The divine will in man, that divine energy. So when is it kindled? By the seeking from the lower for the higher. And when kindled, how does it grow? By offering, by oblations. The more we offer our actions to this Agni, they become purified and the Agni grows within us. So, this is how, and let the wise man restrain speech in his mind, and mind in the self of knowledge, and knowledge in the great self, and that again let him restrain in the self that is at peace. So again it speaks about withdrawing the consciousness from outer to inner. This self-born hath set the doors of the body to face outward. Therefore the soul of a man gazeth outward, and not at the self within. Hardly a wise man here and there, desiring immortality, turneth his eyes inward and seeth the self within him. So we have to learn to draw the strings of consciousness and concentrate within. In the Upanishad, it is primarily the heart, because that's where the Creator resides, and discover Him. One day, by the force and intensity of this concentration, the veil is rent, and truth appears, and the self appears. The rest childishly follow after desire and pleasure, and walk into the snare of death, who gapeth wide for them. But calm souls, having learned of immortality, seek not for permanence in the things of this world that pass and are not. So, when every desire that harboureth in the heart of a man hath been loosened from its moorings, then this mortal putteth on immortality. Looseth is basically that even if they are coming, they are not having a grip upon him. They become loose. If it is satisfied, it's okay. But one is not seeking their satisfaction. One is not lusting after them. So it has become loose. And of course, this famous one, when all the strings of the heart are rent asunder, even here in this human birth, then the mortal becomes immortal. This is the whole teaching of the scriptures. And probably finally we'll just read. They dwell in many bonds of the ignorance. Children thinking we have achieved our aim of paradise. So paradise is not the goal. Jannat mein jayenge and we'll go to some heaven. For when the men of works are held by their affections and arrive not at the knowledge, then they are overtaken by anguish. Then their paradise wastes by enjoying and they fall from their heavens. So heaven of the vital worlds which we see in religious scriptures is not the goal of Upanishads, but to go still higher, something which is beyond them. Mind bewildered, who hold the oblation offered and the well dug for the greatest righteousness, and know not any other highest good. On the back of heaven they enjoy the world won by their righteousness, and enter again this or even a lower world. So again it is saying this idea of good karma, good karma, go to heaven, and bad karma, go to hell. This is a very, very imperfect knowledge. This is not the true knowledge. Back of heaven, we see in Savitri it is described, twilight of the gods. They go like that. But for the Upanishad, the goal is the highest good, the highest felicity, and nothing short of that. But they who in the forest follow after faith and self-discipline, calm and full of self-knowledge, living upon alms. Basically, it's like you don't possess anything, you don't covet anything. Alms is not literally going with a begging bowl, but whatever you need will come to you to live with this faith, this truth of Yogashem Vahamyam. Divine will take care of you. Cast from them the dust of their passions, and through the gate of the sun they pass on. There, where is the immortal, the spirit, the self, undecaying and imperishable. In that age, we didn't yet have the sun coming and descending upon earth. And then finally, I think we can stop with this. Take up the bow of the Upanishad, that mighty weapon, set to it an arrow sharpened by adoration. Draw the bow with a heart fully devoted to the contemplation of that. And, O fair son, it's interesting. Arjuna actually also means the fair one. Swet. O fair one, son. Somebody who has removed from him this evil tendencies, evil thoughts. O fair son, penetrate into that as thy target, even into the immutable. Heart full of adoration. Take the bow of the Upanishad. So, how will we concentrate? Om is the bow and soul is the arrow. And that, even the Brahman is spoken of as the target. So, with the japa of Om, with the soul aspiring for the Brahman, full of adoration, it stays with that. That must be pierced with an unfaltering aim. One must be absorbed into that as an arrow is lost in its target. So you see, it's very interesting when an arrow is lost in the target, its head is stuck in the target. Its tail quivers for some time. So must we be completely absorbed in the divine, even though the tail, the nature, which is attached to that, it may quiver for some time. It's okay. That some time may mean some time. But within ourselves, we must always have the divine as the aim. So this is the teaching of the Upanishad. There are so many more practices, but more or less the essence is this.